You would recall that in the story of Oya, the fierce goddess of winds and transformation, we mentioned one of her notable children called Shopono, the powerful Orisha associated with the smallpox disease and its healing. Shopono governs both disease and healing, particularly the dreaded affliction of smallpox. To some, he brings chaos and death, but to those who understand his ways, he holds the secrets to survival. The story you are about to listen to is the story of how a slave from West Africa who was familiar with the ways of Shopono came up with a cure for the smallpox disease. The tale of the enslaved African who introduced inoculation to Boston in 1721 echoes the dual nature of Shopono. He carried knowledge from his homeland, knowledge that could both cause and prevent suffering. Yet, like Shopono, his wisdom was feared before it was accepted. His story is not just one of science, but of resilience, survival, and echoes of an ancient spiritual truth that disease and its cure often walk hand in hand. The streets of Boston were a nightmare. People collapsed in the dirt, their skin covered in pus-filled sores. The air smelled of death. Families barricaded themselves inside their homes, praying that the disease wouldn't seep through their doors. Smallpox was tearing the city apart, killing hundreds. Doctors were helpless. No cure, no hope, until a man who was never supposed to have a voice spoke up. His name was Onesimus. Before Onesimus was known as a man of knowledge, he was simply property. He had no last name, no freedom, and no right to speak. Born in West Africa, he had been stolen from his home, shackled and forced onto a ship. The journey across the ocean was pure terror, disease, hunger, and death everywhere. He had no idea where he was being taken. When he arrived in Boston in the early 1700s, he was sold to Cotton Mather, a powerful puritanical minister. Mather was known for his sermons about God and morality, yet he owned another human being like furniture. He gave Onesimus his name, stripping him of his true identity. But Onesimus was not just a slave. He carried something far more powerful than chains. He carried knowledge. By 1721, Boston was under siege. Smallpox, a ruthless killer, had returned. It struck without warning. A person could be fine one day and dying the next. The disease spread like wildfire, jumping from house to house. Doctors had no way to stop it. Entire families were wiped out. Coffins lined the streets. Smallpox had been present in the American colonies for decades, but its outbreak was particularly vicious. It arrived in Boston through a single source: infected sailors from a ship that docked in the harbor. The disease clung to their clothes, their breath, their very skin. One infected person could unknowingly pass it to an entire household. The cramped, unsanitary conditions of the city made it worse. The disease spread like an unstoppable fire, infecting the rich and the poor alike. No one was safe. No one knew how to stop it. Cotton Mather was terrified. He had seen smallpox before, but never like this. He prayed, but no miracle came. His own congregation was dying. Then one day, in the midst of all this horror, Onesimus spoke. "I know how to stop it," he said. Mather looked at him, shocked. A slave giving medical advice? It was almost laughable. But Onesimus continued. "In my land, We do something to keep us from getting sick. A small cut is made on the arm. Then we take a bit of the sickness, just enough, and put it inside the cut. The body learns the sickness and fights it. Then the sickness cannot kill us. Matter's eyes widened. He had never heard of anything like this before. It sounded dangerous, insane even. But deep down, he was desperate. And Onesimus spoke with certainty, not fear. Mather did something no one expected. He listened. He researched what Onesimus said and found accounts from Turkish and African traditions that spoke of something similar. The idea was radical, but if it was true, it could save lives. Mather approached Dr. Zabdiel Boylston, a Boston physician. He told him about Onesimus's method. Boylston hesitated. If this was wrong, it could kill more people. But if it was right, it could be the only way out. Boylston decided to test it. First, he inoculated his own son. Then he tested it on enslaved people who had no choice in the matter. The results were shocking. The inoculated slaves did not get severely sick. They recovered quickly. It worked! Mather and Boylston had proof they could stop smallpox, but Boston was not ready to accept the truth. When word spread that Mather was using an African method to fight the disease, people were furious. How could they trust the knowledge of a slave? How could something uncivilized be the answer? Mather's house was attacked. A bomb was thrown through his window with a note, "You dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with this." Mather became a target. People accused him of playing God. Others called inoculation a form of witchcraft. The idea of deliberately exposing someone to a disease, no matter how controlled, was terrifying. People would rather let their families die than put faith in something they did not understand. Onesimus was also in danger. If people found out he was the slave who had introduced this method, he could be beaten, or even worse. He had no rights, no protection. The knowledge he shared was saving lives, but it also made him a target. Despite the hatred, the numbers did not lie. As more people were inoculated, fewer died. The fear and anger did not disappear overnight, but slowly minds began to change. Onesimus had a family, though little is recorded about them. It is likely he had a wife and children, but as an enslaved person, he had no legal rights over them. Families were often separated at an owner's whim. He would have lived in constant fear that his loved ones would be sold away. There is no clear record of what happened to Onesimus after the epidemic. Some accounts suggest that he was granted partial freedom. Others say he disappeared from history, lost in the shadows of time. What is certain is that his knowledge, his gift, survived. Despite saving lives, Onesimus was never truly recognized in his lifetime, and for a long time, his name faded and his contributions were buried beneath the pages of history. However, in 2016, Onesimus was posthumously recognized by Boston Magazine as one of the 100 best Bostonians of all time. Historian Ted Widmer noted that Onesimus reversed many of the colonists' traditional racial assumptions. He stated that Onesimus had a lot more knowledge medically than most of the Europeans in Boston at that time. The technique he carried from Africa changed medicine forever. Years later, his technique became the foundation for what we now call vaccination. Without him, smallpox might have killed millions more. Without him, science might have taken decades longer to find a way to fight deadly diseases. Onesimus was not a doctor. He was not a scientist. He was a man who had been stolen, silenced, and ignored. But in the face of death, he did what many others could not. He saved lives with nothing but the truth. And for that, the world owes him everything. The story of Onesimus is not just a story of medicine. It is a story of how knowledge, no matter where it comes from, has the power to change the world. It is a reminder that the voices of the unheard can hold the answers we desperately need. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, untold stories. Until next time, this is Folktales by Fayoke, where history comes alive.